Hello and welcome to Protect Ukraine Now YouTube channel. In this very crazy world where one country is for 4 years attacking another, our job is to support those who taking the most burden, those who making a difference to the outcome of this war. And no, I'm not talking about the politicians. I'm talking about the military. At Protect Ukraine Now, we always advocate for military assistance to Ukraine because if you're not on the front, you have to be doing everything you can for the front. And this is what we definitely can do as diaspora, as Ukraine supporters. And today it is my special pleasure to have Illya Sekirin, who is a military, well, former military, I guess. You're how should I say? You're probably a veteran, right, of this war, and he is going to tell us a few things about what no one is talking about things that, frankly, our Western leaders are not quite aware of because they only hear what other politicians are saying, but they don't get that ground truth. They don't know exactly what's happening on the front, how technology has changed, how this war is different from what it used to be, and how the future of the warfare is going to look like. Hi, Ilya. Thanks for joining our meeting today.
Hello, Alec. Thank you very much for inviting me. I just want to make a little introduction about who I am. So I'm a Ukrainian Canadian, and I volunteered to fight for Ukraine in 2022. And I was trained as a drone pilot and then a drone pilot instructor. And I've been flying the drone on the front lines for about 2 years. And then I also worked as a researcher and translator for the Ukrainian General Staff, and then ended up as an advisor to several members of the Stavka, that's the Ukrainian High Command, chaired by President Zelensky. So currently I am a military advisor, mostly drone related. Yeah.
Amazing. And let me introduce Oleg. Yeah, Oleg, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Oleg. I'm open source military analyst here with Protect Ukraine now. And I would like also to add that Ilya is an author of the book, Rise of Machines. I highly recommend this book. Ilya has been an author of a concept of unmanned systems command that currently is on a high rise in Ukraine. And I think you can find a lot in this book, questions that you may not know, may not realize how the things are going in Ukraine. There's a lot of insider information and a lot of the thoughts about um, why certain decisions were taken the way they are. So with this, let's get started.
Uh, Great. And uh, let's uh, let's talk about how this war started for you, Ilya. Like, how did you end up in the military?
Yeah, so I joined the Ukrainian military in March of 2022. So it was 1 month after the invasion began. So I put my work in order, and so I could dedicate myself to the defense of Ukraine. And initially I joined the volunteer battalion. It was a Brestvo battalion headed by Korchinsky. Not that I was a big supporter of his ideology or the views that he has, but mostly because I was a foreigner and there weren't that many units that accepted a foreigner at the time. So I wrote an email to the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, but it took them 1 month to reply. And by that time, I was already with Karchinsky unit. And after some time, after the Russians retreated from the Kiev Oblast, uh, most of the foreigners moved east and started finding other units where they could participate in the war more actively. And I ended up with a Special Forces National Guard unit. And we were visited by a few drone instructors, and I signed up for a drone course, and that's how I became a drone pilot, and then a drone pilot instructor on the front lines. And I worked in these guys for about 2 years, and also was a translator and researcher for the Ukrainian General Staff and for some other Ukrainian and foreign volunteer units, both military and humanitarian. So I was involved in many projects. And starting in early 2024, I became advising some members of the Ukrainian High Command, generals and ministers, on drone warfare and other related issues.
Okay, so you're a foreigner, you're a Canadian citizen, so you had to go through some obstacles to join Ukrainian military. At the time when so many people were fleeing the country, you were actually trying to enlist and fight for Ukraine. That's amazing, and thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice, because definitely that's not anything that a regular person is able to do. But can you tell us what motivated you? Like, why did you decide that this is important?
Yeah, I think my motivation was actually a knee-jerk reaction to the brutalities that the Russians were committing in Ukraine. So I would compare it. I was use a metaphor that if like my mother was attacked in the street, I would go to her aid immediately. I wouldn't think like how many robbers are there, the attackers, if they have knives or any other weapons. I would just come in and try to protect her, and think I felt the same way. Of course, I was aware of all the consequences. Like I could be injured, I could be missing, I could be dead. But I decided to take those risks and to defend things that I believe were right.
Mhm. Great. I want our listeners to hear that, because most of the time they're struggling between, should I pick up my phone and call my senator, call my representative, or should I sign that petition? I want them to listen to people like yourself who left everything behind and went to war, risking everything you have, starting with your own life. And uh, talking about our listeners, what should they really understand about this war? How is it perhaps different from what we think usually about wars? Is it definitely not like, for example, World War II that so many people perhaps have seen in movies? But is it more like, I don't know, Terminator movie that we have seen probably a lot as well. It's a very famous TV series. Is it like, how would you describe the modern warfare?
Well, first of all, a war is not a movie, so yeah, yeah. I respect you, but I just wanted to make it clear that the rise of the machines is the. I did not make a direct connotation to the movie, but I wanted to make the importance of the unmanned systems, and the full title of the book is "Rise of the Machines:
Mhm.
Drone Warfare in the Russian Ukraine War,
Mhm.
Tactics, Operations, Strategy," and. To answer your question, uh, this war has witnessed the rise of the drone. So there are periods in military history which witness a significant change in the character of war. So in the 1930s, there was the advent of the tank and the airplane. And so these weapons were the main weapons with which the war was fought. Of course, there was artillery and infantry, but tanks and airplanes were the hallmark of the new type of mechanized warfare. And it's just the development of the technology has allowed a drone revolution to occur during the current war. And I think that the way that this war is being fought will definitely influence the wars of the 21st century. And I think that the drone is here with us to stay, both the drone and the counter drone systems. And I think that the Western militaries need to take it seriously. And the world in general need to understand that if if you don't adapt to the drone revolution and your enemy does, the enemy will be at a significant advantage in relation to you. And so your whole situation is imperiled if you do not adapt to the drone revolution. That's how I think that this war is really a game changer because of the drone.
That is a serious concern for the West, at least it should be. I'm not confident how much they realize. So if you had a chance to pass the message to them with respect to how Ukraine changed the warfare, what Ukraine could help them, their armies, to strengthen their militaries and improve their readiness.
Yes, the ongoing war has produced two strongest armies equipped with unmanned systems forces, that is Ukraine and Russia. And Ukraine sides with the West, while Russia sides mostly with authoritarian regimes like China, Iran, North Korea. And so if the West can use Ukrainian know-how and expertise in drone warfare in order to build its own drone capabilities, well, Russia will probably do the same for China. And so I think that the West can work with Ukraine for our mutual benefit for the defense of Western democracies. And if Ukraine crumbles, we need to understand that other authoritarian regimes will be emboldened by this. So China may decide, okay, the West is weak, we can attack and take over Taiwan, for example. And so the war in Ukraine is not just a local war. It is a confrontation between authoritarian regimes and Western democracies. And whether you like it or not, Ukraine is at the forefront of this struggle. And Ukraine can really contribute to the West. So it's not just that the West spends resources on Ukraine, but Ukraine also gives back in terms of providing the West potentially with the technology and organization and other advice in how to structure their own unmanned systems forces. And the West currently is not a belligerent in this war, and that's why it doesn't have the experience that Ukraine has. And so we can both help each other, and I think Ukraine should be integrated into NATO and the European Union in order to strengthen our mutual defense against possible aggression from authoritarian regimes.
So to summarize, there's several things that you mentioned. One is that our adversaries like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran are emboldened by inactivity and dismissal from the West. And by dismissal, I mean when the West does not give enough to win, but just give enough to survive for Ukraine and slowly degrade its capabilities. I mean,
Yes.
Ukrainian capabilities and Russian capabilities. Another talking point was that Ukraine can help learn the West, right? And another is that, yeah, go ahead.
Yes,
Yeah.
I just wanted to confirm that, well, if you just put yourself in the shoes of the Chinese, okay, so they see that the West cannot get itself together to protect one of its own. It's a partner, Ukraine, and if it sees that the West is weak militarily and it doesn't have the resolve to support Ukraine, then it will also apply the same logic to other potential points of confrontation with the West, for example, in Taiwan. And it doesn't only apply to China. For example, Iran can be emboldened to attack and to stir trouble in the Middle East. North Korea can put pressure on South Korea. And the whole world can become even more unstable than it currently is. And so a domino effect can occur if Ukraine falters.
And another point that I'd like to add to this, there was a certain position, certain pro-Ukraine against Russia, against aggressors, not just this aggressor, but aggressors in general, position that the West took. And what we have seen, unfortunately, in 4 years, what was said and what was done were no, not exactly two different things, but there was a huge gap between the material assistance to Ukraine and what was announced. And that by itself discredits NATO, discredits Western forces. And this is something that's very clear and very obvious to China, Russia, North Korea, all of these adversaries that we just talked about. All of them get to see where we're not sincere about our statements that we put out, and we're not providing Ukraine with enough, in this case, military assistance, air defense. We're still waiting for capable jets, fighter jets. We're still waiting for significant investment into that very drone technology that is evolving very rapidly. And Ilya, I understand that we're not in a movie. I only used movie analogy because this is probably the closest that a regular person can associate themselves with a war. That's the only time they get to witness it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that, and I just want to say that not because I'm a drone advisor, but generally, if you look at the casualties the drone is inflicting now, it's 80% are inflicted by the drones. So it's not artillery, small arms fire, or missiles, etc. It's the drone, and that's why you need to put your resources on the drone technology. And I think that the weapon that Ukraine needs most is the drone, and most of the drones and related technologies like W assets, etc., are produced within Ukraine. So at this stage of the war, I think that the West most benefits Ukraine if it invests in a drone ecosystem within Ukraine, and Ukraine can also help build the drones for the Western countries because our drone production facilities are operating and they're have capacity because we do not have the financial resources to build more drones and more EW assets. So we can also arm Western countries with Ukrainian drones, and because our labor costs are lower, we can produce drones much cheaper than in the United States. For example, a drone in the United States would cost 10 times as much as a drone in Ukraine. And if you need a large amount of drones, and you can't really rely on China, so Ukraine can be the China of the West. So it can be the factory that produces the drone and related equipment for Western countries. And so I think that Ukraine needs to cooperate with the West to become a drone powerhouse and to build drones for itself and for example, for the United States, for other NATO countries. This is my opinion.
Yeah, I
I
like
want
to
to
call it
double.
Silicon Valley of the West. Ukraine is really like a technological hub. Valley is probably going to be the greatest analogy. Okay, so
I
do
I
we want?
wanted to add to that.
Sure.
Yes, I wanted to add to that. So just a month ago, I think it was Marine Corps that released a statement that they are looking for 10,000 drones for up to 4,000 4,000 per drone. So it's essentially 10,000 drones for up to 400,000 for 4 million, right? 10,000 multiplied by 4,000 per drone, it's 40 million contract that they were looking to sign with anyone who's ready to sign. But there is a problem to that, right? Ukraine currently cannot export by the law technologies, specifically drone technologies, military technologies. So if Ukraine would be interested to participate, that would need to be a regulation on Ukraine part to finally open the exporting regulation to let the producers do this kind of contracts.
Yeah, I think Ukraine plans to start exporting drones and drone technologies in the near future, but of course it will be regulated in order to put priority for Ukrainian frontline efforts and other war-related activities. But it's coming. So once the war will be over, uh, Ukraine will be able to export more drones. But I think even this year there are plans of the government to start issuing some limited export licenses, and so Ukraine can already, because the menace of the Russian aggression is already out there, and the West needs to be prepared, and the West needs the drones to integrate into their armies now. It cannot wait until the end of the war. And even if you take into consideration that Russia may want to attack Estonia, for example, or another Baltic state or Poland now, when the West is not prepared militarily, even if the Ukrainian conflict is not resolved yet, then the West is in deep trouble because it doesn't have the drone technologies to resist the Russian drone-centered invasion. So I think it's important that the Western countries worked with Ukraine to allow some form of drone exports, and it's already happening. And so I think Ukraine and the Western countries are moving in the right direction, but they need to accelerate what they're doing.
Yeah, but that goes really slow. For example, a year ago, U.S. Army boasted in the media that they were able to drop the grenades on the drone. And I think around the new year, there was a message that they finally were able to hit the tank with, or a tank was an FPV. I think it was a moving tank. So essentially, it took a year from a grenade drop to hitting a tank with an FPV. And of course, Ukraine is moving much, much faster. So is that the pace that the West can adopt by itself? For example, here I'm talking about the United States. And is there something, or what are the steps that Ukraine can help the United States to adopt much faster and get up to speed?
Like I already mentioned, we need to make sure that the whole ecosystem is integrated with the Western countries. So, for example, the US Army has launched a pilot project to create its own version, kind of drone Amazon version of Amazon for drone technologies, where a division or a brigade could procure its own drones for its own needs in a quick and bureaucracy-free way. And I think it would be better not to create this marketplace from scratch, but for the US and NATO countries just to join Brave One. This is a Ukrainian marketplace that is already there, that already has tested drone producers, EW producers, land robots. And this is a technological integration between NATO countries and Ukraine. And on another level, I think that organizational structure and even the whole doctrine needs adjusting itself to the era of the drone. And that's why my book and my own advice in that regard comes in. So I proposed that each army should create unmanned systems forces following the Russian and Ukrainian examples. And in part, the Ukrainian unmanned systems forces were created in response to my memorandum to Stavka from the 3rd of January 2024. And so I was one of the persons who was at the forefront of the creation of unmanned system forces in Ukraine. And there are lots of other things that the Western militaries need to do. For example, I call this process dronification. So the dronification, or the introduction of drones into all your warfighting capabilities, it can happen from the bottom up and from the top down. So I think in order to get an accelerated pathway to full dronification of the army, and it also applies to the Navy and Air Force, is that you should allow some sort of initiative for local commanders to experiment with drone technologies and to procure their own drones. And there should be a centralized coordination of this effort, so from the top down. And those efforts should converge and ensure that the army has the drones that it needs. And it's not just the frontline drones; it's also the logistical drones and other aspects that they need to adjust to. For example, the engineer corps needs to make sure they can build the fortification that are drone resistant, which are very different from World War II and post-World War II style trenches and bunkers. And another aspect would be a reform to the way that the medical evacuation happens, because now in the kill zone, especially the drone kill zone, especially, you cannot evacuate soldiers very quickly. You cannot rotate them, and so soldiers need to be able to provide more advanced medical care and to be able to stabilize the patient, maybe even for several days, before he can be taken out. So there's no 1 hour golden rule within which you need to take the person out to a professional medical facility. And I can talk for hours about this, so I don't want to put too much technical stuff into our conversation, just touching on it briefly.
But talking about technology, Oleg just mentioned that the United States was just recently bragging about dropping a grenade, and then they hit a tank with FPV, and that was a great accomplishment. At the same time, we've just seen the miracles that Ukrainians are doing, hitting various kinds of equipment. Was very impressed with a recent video where a drone, a robot, basically apprehended for Russian military. They basically, that piece of equipment forced them to surrender, give up their weapons, and walk towards where people could take over. So that's sort of technology Ukraine already has in their hands. Either something that particularly strikes you as innovative and meaningful and really, and of course, we can talk about something that's very secretive, but something that you can share with the general public. What do you think is really defining this war right now as far as capabilities in technology?
Well, the thing that characterizes the drone revolution at this current early stage is that technology changes rapidly, and you have these technological cycles. For example, Ukraine introduces FPV drones, then Russia copies them, then they start changing frequencies, then the Russians come up with the fiber optic technology, though the Ukrainians first experimented with this technology, but it wasn't rolled out on a massive scale. And then the Russians did that. They rolled out large, but the reason that actually the Russians managed to get ahead of Ukraine in terms of fiber optic controlled drones is because of China. The Chinese are giving them the capabilities and the fiber optic cables to use against Ukraine. But I think that the current stage of drone warfare is the rise of the land robots. I think land robots made a real breakthrough this year. So you see them. The Ukrainian armed forces have started creating specialized land robot or UGVs, unmanned ground vehicle companies within each brigade. So it's similar to what they were doing in 2023 with creating unmanned aerial systems, UAS companies for each brigade. So now they're doing the same thing with land robots. And but currently, land robots are used mostly for logistical tasks such as helping the rotation, bringing up supplies, and evacuating the wounded. And the next stage would be to put focus on assault land robots or assault UGVs. That is a land robot or drone that is armed with an remotely operated machine gun or an automatic grenade launcher. And so this is the video that you refer to, like that UGV took 4 Russian prisoners, or in another instinct, Dev Droid 12.7 model defended a Ukrainian position for about a month. A robot defending a ground position against Russian assaults by human infantry. And in the end, in a war of machines against humans, of course, the machines will prevail. And so that is why we need to make sure that the Western countries take drones seriously and use the machines against machines. Because if they will try to fight Russian drones with their humans, it will not turn out well. It will turn out ugly. And so, yeah, that's why I keep hammering this point that the West needs to take drone revolution seriously and to arm itself with drones and counter-drone systems.
Yeah, you mentioned that each country needs to create unmanned systems command or unmanned systems forces top-down. I think Ukraine actually tried somewhat similar, even at the lesser scale, when they saw that the drones back then it was UAVs, are performing very well, and those units, those brigades which operate UAVs at scale, achieve much higher results. They basically ordered like every brigade to create a company of UAVs, and that actually went horrible until the people who understands how the drones should be used, what are the peculiarities of using drones, how to train operators, and like what technology they should be using to be successful in the world where EW and jamming is so popular. So I think what they would be really struggling with, like it's a huge stretch for them to just create it from scratch. So maybe it would be an easier approach to start small and get people who understand, who have the vision, who understand why drones are needed. Because like right now, if you ask someone in U.S. Army, like what to do if you have like 20 kilometers ahead some drone team, the answer would be, well, let's call artillery barrage on them. Let's attack them using aviation. Let's drop a JDAM on them. So there's a different what they have been trained to, and what the reality in Ukraine, and of course Ukraine doesn't have the capabilities that they have. So
Well,
from that perspective, what would be the gradual approach for them to start? Maybe it's going to be like the inviting some of the US officers on the ground to learn from Ukraine, or some other steps. How do you see that?
yes, normally you're not supposed to reinvent the wheel, are you? So, of course, the Western militaries should take Ukrainian dossier and should study it carefully and needs to integrate with Ukraine in terms of procurement and organization of drone forces. And one of the primary things that's keeping the U.S. Army from using the drones is the conservative nature of some generals in the army, and it's natural that some generals prefer to fight previous wars and not future wars. It has always been the case. For example, if we take the 1930s, many generals, especially in the French general staff, General Gamelin and others, and even General Hindenburg, he did not understand tank warfare. He said tanks are too complicated. You can use cavalry in order as an exploitation force, as a mobile force. Why do you need tanks? And the same thing is happening now. So you have this, and this one of the reasons that I wrote the book is to convince the officers in the West that drones are really a game changer. And the reason for that is that drones bring some of unique characteristics that are unique only to them as a weapon system, and which are not shared by other weapon systems. For example, the drones are discardable, so they are treatable. They establish omnipresence on the battlefield. They are everywhere. They can they can administer accurate direct fires and other characteristics. And so basically, we've seen the drone is not just a poor man's air force. That is a fallacy. The drone is a new weapon that actually defeated other weapons on the battlefield. That's how the drone kill zone was created. That the drones first is destroyed all the tanks in the 10-kilometer zone. Then it's destroyed all the enemy artillery and started getting deeper, up to 20 kilometers now, or even further. And so it defeated the tank. You don't see tanks anymore on the battlefield. It largely defeated IFVs. So IFVs have only a limited role right now. The artillery has been pushed away from the drone kill zone, and you don't see any concentrations of infantry. And so the drone has really become the king of the battlefield. So now it's rules supreme over other traditional or can we say conventional weapons such as artillery, armor, infantry, army attack helicopters. So the drone is really unique, and that's why the dronification of the armed forces should occur in the West.
So you're saying a very important thing that probably may not be fully understood in the West, that the drone not just poor man's air force, it's much more, and it's transforming the battlefield. And
It
because of
started
the
it
drone,
started as a poor man's Air Force, but it evolved to something that is better than legacy weapons.
yes, so it transformed the battlefield. You cannot now rely on your combat brigade teams to penetrate the battlefield because the drones will catch you there even after the penetration. The drones can resupply your troops that are encircled. So encircled is not as much of a catastrophe as it used to be before. So it's really transforming. But what would be the suggestion to those generals in U.S. Armed Forces, in other armies? How do they? What's for them? What's the best way to understand? What's the way for them to get this vision?
Yes, I think there's no denial that the drone has transformed the battlefield, and the more Western militaries cling to their legacy weapons and not integrating. I'm not saying like ditch everything that you have. No, you need just to integrate them. For example, the Russians are using drones and in order to guide artillery. For example, there's a link between Orlan 10 M-STAR S self-propelled assault gun and other links where the drone, for example, is used as a IST, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance asset in order for aviation for example, the glide bombs that the Russians are attacking Ukrainian positions with are actually often guided from the drones, and so that's why you can integrate the systems that you already have in order to make them more effective. And so essentially it's very important paradigm shift. So you need to leave no stone untouched in order to prepare your military for the era of drone warfare.
So what you're saying is basically there is a kill chain from drone to the glide bombs, and I think United States has like a similar kill chain, but it's they're using the satellites, and of course there's a whole different organization. The kill chain is much longer to get this spot from the satellite and translate it into a command on the battlefield. And for the drones, it's like it can be in your like battery of stas, right? So the kill chain is much shorter, and you don't have all the satellites in the world to guide to fire correct every howitzer on the battlefield. Unlike was the drones, you can have more drones than howitzers. You cannot have more satellites than howitzers, right?
Yeah, because of the transparent battlefield and the kill zone, you cannot have a battery of Star S assembled in one point and directing fire. So you would have individual artillery pieces doing that job. So just saying that, and offering it as an example of how the battlefield has been transformed by the drone. So there is more need for concealment and dispersal of your forces. And the counter drone is currently behind the attacking drones, and I expect that to be the case in the future, for the foreseeable future. So I think your best friends are concealment and dispersion, and that's why you. But actually, the way that the drones are currently used may not always be the case how it will be used even in the near future. What I'm trying to say is that currently the drones are pretty much used dispersed equally along the whole front line. So you have these brigades that are assigned a certain number of drone operators. But I think the Russians are already using it, and the Ukrainians first started it during the Kursk offensive. That you concentrate your drone forces at a breakthrough point in order to establish local UIS superiority, and then use this drone cover in order to break through. And then for the exploitation, you also use not tanks, but drone-centered maneuver force. And there, I think we are coming to uh, the idea. I introduced this idea of a drone blitz in my book. It's where a country concentrates, for example, 50% of all its drones on a narrow section of the front, uh, in order to create a local UAS superiority and to make a penetration. And then through this penetration, the exploitation force can roll up the front line and can attack the enemy drone kill zone from the rear and make an encirclement, an operational encirclement of a large body of enemy troops. And the Russians are already attempting it, and the Ukrainians are countering it with concentrations of their own drone forces. For example, near Pokrovsk, the Russians concentrated their best drone operators, the Rubicon and other similar groups. And the Ukrainians counter that with concentrations of drone forces of their own. And it will be very interesting to see how this develops, how one country concentrates drones in one place, another counters that, and then disperses them. And I think that the front lines will not be static for too long. I think one belligerent or the other could make a penetration with a concentration of drone NDW assets and make a breakthrough. And another country will try to counter that by concentrating their own drones. So it will be interesting how all of this develops. But currently, the drone favors the defensive over the offensive. But if you start maneuvering your drone forces, that could change.
Concentration and coordination. That's what's really important in the war, right? Quoting Mark Solonian, of course. There's this idea among Westerners, Americans, if you move far away from the front line, far away from Ukraine, people have this idea that Russia is a huge country, Ukraine is much smaller, less people, less equipment, smaller economy, and there's no way Ukraine can defeat or protect itself from Russia, given these disproportions. We also have seen that the front line in 4 years is fairly stable. Of course, there are some advancements in certain sections, but overall, the line of the front is more or less stable. Is this fair to say that the situation as it is balanced? And what is your thoughts about Ukraine prevailing in this war? Like, do you see Ukraine in the foreseeable future being able to at least stop the aggressor from pushing forward?
The main reason why Russia was not able to defeat Ukraine through greater resources is because of the drone. We're coming back to the drone revolution. So if Ukraine didn't have the drones, of course, Russia would use its conventional forces, which are much, much, much stronger and larger than Ukrainian capabilities, and would overwhelm our country. But because of the drone and the first mover advantage that Ukraine had with the drones, Ukraine was able to outsmart the Russians and outdo them on the field of battle. So by putting more, by betting even larger on the drones, I think that Ukraine can even push back the Russians, and by introducing new operational concepts and operational art, drone-centered operational art into the picture, I think Ukraine can defeat the Russians. And I'm really supportive of the moves that the Ukrainian government has recently taken by, the appointment of Fedorov as the Minister of Defense. I think this should have been done a long time ago, at least 1 or 2 years ago. And a lot of time was wasted, and Ukraine now has this devastation of the rear areas and this Russian terror against civilian population that they are doing right now as we speak. But still, it's better to do something late than never. And so it was a good thing. And I think that what Ukrainian government needs to follow up with is to replace Syrsky, who's a general of the past, and he doesn't understand drone warfare. And you need to put somebody who's a younger person. We need a general, probably in his 40s, to replace him, who knows how to operate with large drone formations of brigades or larger size, because Ukraine has created large unmanned systems brigades or regiments, but I don't think they're using them effectively. And I recommended it to the general staff and to Stavka to start using drone maneuver of large drone formations in order to make defensive or offensive moves. And I think the only way for that to be implemented is Surgical is replaced by somebody who understands drone warfare. I don't know what Zelensky is thinking, but I would take the opportunity of this interview in order to put forward the idea that if you change the Minister of Defense, but you put old Soviet-style generals in charge of the actual fighting, you cannot win the war by management alone. You need the generals to think in terms of drone warfare, and that's why I think that Syrskyi should be replaced and the whole general staff reformed in order to make sure that it's drone centered.
Yeah, that's a very important point, and I think that's what we heard. The United States, at least the President Trump's administration, has been, I would say, was talking about privately to one of our friends. They actually said that in 2024 alone, it was soon after the elections, and they reached out and they said, and this is a public information, which is why I'm saying it. They fully understand the, I would say, deficiencies of Syrskyi, and they said that in 2024, all the withdrawals from the Ukraine-controlled territories were not approved by Syrskyi and was not coordinated. It was the desperate move of soldiers, which is why they actually anticipated that the front line would collapse within 3 to 6 months back in November 2024. So now we have like 15 months into that, and Ukraine is still holding, which is a miracle from looking back then, but the situation definitely deteriorate. So the question is not only whether Syrskyi is able to understand drones, but also in the eyes of allies, at least from the United States perspective. Syrskyi is a general who has no control of his own forces. He is not capable of orchestrating all the operations on the battlefield. When troops withdraw and he does not control that, that is a sign that he does not control the battlefield, despite all the micromanagement steps he takes. So I totally with you here.
Yeah, I should just okay. So if you ask, I will answer. Syrskyi is a bad general. So I would explain why. It's not just that I have any personal animosities. On the contrary, I think he's a nice person. But the problem is that he adheres to a rigid defense, military thinking, and so he issues this kind of no step back order, which doesn't allow tactical withdrawal. So he once the Russians attack and they know that Syrskyi is very rigid in defense, there's a fortified area, let's say Avdiivka, or it can be any other city, and they outflank it on. They make penetrations on the flanks, and they suffer a lot during these penetrations. But once the penetrations occur and the pincers are enveloping the city, the Ukrainian defenders are not allowed to retreat in time and have to take battle in unfavorable conditions. And they start taking casualties, which they wouldn't need to take if Syrskyi allowed them to retreat to a more defensible line. And another problem with Syrskyi, doesn't really know how to coordinate combined arms maneuver. So the best thing for him to do, and in Avdiivka, during the Avdiivka battle that I already referred to, I put forward a counterattack plan, which was based on a concentration of drones and the use of the 3rd Assault Brigade, which was then being deployed to the area. So Syrsky's idea was basically to make the 3rd Brigade, Assault Brigade, enter the city itself and to be engaged in direct urban warfare, which is very attritional for the troops. And my idea was to concentrate 50% of Ukrainian drone operators and EW assets on the flank of the Russian northern pincer, and in an unexpected thrust, establish local UAS superiority and use small parties of stormtroops to encircle the encirclers, basically, to encircle those who wanted to encircle us, to cut off this penetration. And Syrsky did not do that, not in Avdiivka, not on other occasions. That's my criticism to him. So if he wants to hold a position, he needs to be flexible. So he needs to allow a tactical withdrawal or retreat, organized retreat if needed, and he needs to outsmart the Russians. And he's very rigid and in defense, and very rigid in offense. And if we take his offensive during the Kursk incursion, which I also participated in as an advisor. So after the point of breakthrough, they started fanning out in all directions, and I told them to concentrate on one direction, which the Russians expected least. So the Russians expected the Ukrainians to advance towards the Kursk nuclear plant. So the best way would be to attack in the western direction and press the Russians against the same river and the international border. This would multiply our efforts by an indirect approach. So we would use an indirect approach in order to defeat the Russians. And we would also concentrate all our drones on the elevated terrain on the Ukrainian side of the border. So there was a lot of space for drone operators, which could be placed there to provide supporting fire for our advance. And Syrsky didn't want to do that. He did that in a partial way. So he agreed to take the offensive in that direction, but it was only a sideshow. And he just dispersed his force instead of concentrating it. And that's how a great victory was lost. So I to the present day, and I explain it in my book, I believe that we could have defeated the Russians in Kursk if we outsmarted them, if we concentrated them and attacked them in a place and time where they expected least. And actually, if we come back to the Kursk operation, the idea of the Ukrainian command, which I discussed with Fedorov, the first time I heard about the Ukrainian offensive that was prepared for summer of 2024 was half a year before. And Fedorov said that we are going to use drones to attack as in a combined arms operation against the Russians. And I said, where are you going to attack? And said, in the south, to sever the link between Crimea and Russia proper in the south. And I said, don't do that, because this is the thing that the Russian expect you. You were just banging your head against the Surovikin line. And where should we attack then? Asked Fedorov. And I said, attack in the north. Attack in the north, because you need to do what the Russians least expect you to do. And so they attacked at Kursk, but they should have followed it with an unexpected maneuver. After the breakthrough, they should have changed the direction of attack in a way that the Russians least expected, and followed up this unexpected tactical surprise with an operational surprise. But unfortunately, that was only partially done. And so, and this is another criticism that I have of Syrsky, is that in both defense and offense, he's very rigid, not flexible. He doesn't want to outsmart the enemy, and and I think he needs to go now. I think he needs to resign, because he's not doing his job well.
Mhm. That's an amazing insight, and I want to emphasize that criticism is not about personal likes or dislikes for a particular person, but it's rather a mechanism we can improve the current situation. Without criticizing, without showing, without stating different angles, different opinions, we're not going to learn from and move away from current mistakes. We are at the situation where Ukraine has to stop this war. Everyone is talking about ending the war. We lost the previous year to endless negotiations because well, those negotiations went nowhere because there's no incentive for Russia to end the war. So what changes are necessary, be it Ukraine, be it United States or Europe or anywhere else? What kind of changes are needed in order to create those incentives? How do we set the stage for where Russia is going to negotiate in good faith and eventually stop the aggression, go back home?
Well, normally negotiations start when each side thinks that it cannot continue the war and trying to achieve its aims by military means. So if Russia is advancing like it is doing right now and is destroying Ukrainian infrastructure, it's Putin thinks he's winning, and so he can negotiate a more favorable. He would only agree to capitulation probably of Ukraine, but nothing else. So I think for him to start negotiating in good faith, I think he should be defeated on the battlefield. And for that, I think that the change of management at the Ministry of Defense was a good thing. So now Fedorov has said that they have a plan to basically kill 50,000 Russian troops in a month. And because Russia recruits 30 to 40,000 new recruits each month, and so that way Russia will not be able to continue its offensive operations, and so it would degrade it militarily, attrit its infantry, and put Russia in a position where it cannot continue putting pressure on the Ukrainian front lines. And this is a good strategy, but it needs to be followed up by also a change at the head of the Ukrainian army, the change of Sirsky, and then because what Russia can simply do, it can stop attacking, and if it stops attacking with these small infantry infiltration assault groups, the Ukrainian drone operators will have less targets which to destroy. So if there are no soldiers trying to infiltrate through the Ukrainian positions, there are no targets which you can attack. And so that 50,000 figure depends on the Russians attacking. And if the Russians just stay on the defensive and try to destroy Ukraine with long-range drones, Shahed drones, Ukrainian rear areas, they can put pressure on Zelensky to negotiate and to give up Donbass. And that's where a change in Ukrainian commander-in-chief could be helpful, because he could use drone warfare to its greatest potential, but maneuvering drone forces across the front line using concentration and dispersal of forces where it's needed, how it's needed, to attack in the flank of the attacking Russian group of forces, to get into its rear, to destroy them, to encircle them. But you need to have a good commander who understands drone warfare and who is good at operational art, and Sirsky is good at neither. So you cannot fight war with management alone by giving more drones to the brigades. It's good, it's a good first step, but it needs to be followed up with a logical second step.
So where do you put air defense in this consideration? Like if attrition rates are imposed on Russia so they cannot proceed forward, but at the same time, Ukraine is enhancing their air defense. Is that going to the combination of those two factors? Is it going to force Russia to negotiate?
The Ukraine is in a really dire state now, because we've had 4 years of Russian essentially terrorism, because it destroys Ukrainian civilian infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, they are doing everything to freeze our elderly people, our young people, babies in their homes, because they destroy the heating and electricity when it's minus 15 degrees Celsius outside.
Mm-hmm.
And so the problem is that Ukrainian infrastructure is already degraded. And even if Ukrainians manage to increase the numbers of drones that they shoot down, which is, of course, a necessary step. Even the drones that will go through can inflict sufficient damage to already weakened infrastructure. And so that's why I think that Ukrainians needs to take back the initiative on the battlefield. So we need to concentrate drones to catch Russians off guard, to hit them in the flank, to make a serious defeat of the Russian forces on the battlefield. And that's why we need a good commander who has a good plan of how to destroy Russians militarily. And then if we destroy, for example, we encircle one of their groups of forces and take out, for example, 100,000 men from their order of battle, then I think Putin would be much more willing to negotiate, believe me.
Definitely. Ilya, and you already got me convinced that I'm buying your book. I definitely want to read it. But for those who may be still on the fence, is there anything else you want to say to our listeners about your book?
Yeah, I will send you a copy, so don't need to buy it. Yeah. And for the listeners, yes, everybody's welcome to get a copy of the book. So is it okay if if you put the
Absolutely.
link
Yeah.
in the description?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and the book has just been released, and it has a foreword by a British Major General, and I've been in contact with the head of the British military, and they wholeheartedly support my ideas about drone warfare, and they're already implementing some of my ideas into the British Army. So, and the 11th Brigade in the British Army has been reformed to form as drone shield and source. So it's basically an unmanned systems brigade, or it's named differently, but it serves the same purpose. And I think the other militaries also need to follow suit and to expedite their dronification and the embrace of the drone technology. So they need to adopt to the drone warfare, or I'm afraid they will perish. It's like if you try to fight cavalry, fight tanks with cavalry, you will not succeed. So you need to embrace the same technology that your enemy has, and better still to use it smart. Just to give you an example, the French had more tanks and they were more advanced, according to General Guderian, than the Germans did, but they dispersed their tanks equally along the front line in support of as an infantry support weapon, whereas Germans concentrated their tanks in tank divisions and tank corps and armor corps, and that's how the Germans defeated the French. The French and the British in 1940, and so a similar approach can occur now. So I think Ukraine can do a drone blitz, so it can concentrate its drones in a place at time of Ukrainian choosing, and make a large defeat on the Russians on the battlefield, to basically make almost put Russia on the brink of military defeat, and then that's what we need to do. But for that to occur, we need to change the Sirsky, put him with somebody more capable and who understands drone warfare. And my book explains how, without, of course, leaking any secret information, all the memos that I print there are unclassified, but they are still very useful. So, and my book also shows how my personal story, how I some of the missions that I was involved with as a frontline drone operator, and later as an advisor to the Ukrainian High Command. So I think, and it's written in as simple language as possible. So I targeted for a wide audience, not just military professionals and defense analysts, but for anybody with an interest in the Russia-Ukraine war and in warfare in general.
We would love to post a link to your book, and I'm confident people will be interested in reading that. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your insight, Oleg. Thank you for helping with this interview, with these amazing questions. And Ilya, I really hope we're gonna see you again on our channel. We'll be doing more interviews. Your insight is very invaluable to our discussions. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you
If
very
I
much
may,
for having me. Yeah,
if I
please go
may,
ahead.
I would like before the closeout, I would like if you had a message. So there's several things you mentioned. First is in order to finish the war, first a stop of Putin's war machine has to be required. So I'm trying to kind of pass a message to President Trump from our interview. So first, like we need to stop Putin at the front before we can negotiate peace. Negotiating peace while Putin still has a hope to conquer part of Ukraine or all of Ukraine and improve his negotiation position is impossible, right? So this is the first message to President Trump. What would be the second message to President Trump in order to help Ukraine to achieve this lasting peace so that Trump can sign the peace deal? So, what would you ask from the United States?
Yeah, I'm more a military advisor, not a political advisor. But of course, I think that I think that the negotiations can continue. Like they have been going on for quite a while, but the problem is that I don't think that Russia is negotiating in good faith. I don't think it's interested in establishing peace in Ukraine. I think it just wants to destroy Ukraine. That's the problem. And so the negotiations can continue in the UAE or in other countries. It doesn't matter. Putin needs to understand that he cannot defeat Ukraine militarily, and that will only occur if his own troops are defeated on the
Militarily.
battlefield
What's needed
militarily.
for
Yeah,
that?
yeah, and for that, of course, we need to enhance the kill zone, so to make sure that the Russians will have to stop their advance, and then we'll have to strike them where they least expect with a concentrated drone force and to do a drone blitz like the Germans did in the Second World War. So we need to do the same thing, but with drones now. And it's better if Ukraine does it first than Russia does it, because what worries me that Russia is also betting huge on drones. It has plans to create unmanned systems forces of the scale of 200 to 300,000 operators. So this is a vast army of drone operators alone. And it also has created large drone formations capable of operational maneuver. And I really worry that the Russians may try to do it first. That's why I'm also publishing the book and advising the Ukrainians to do it first and not wait for the Russians to do it. So because we need to exploit the first mover advantage, and there are many other things that we need to do. Of course, we can continue our discussion and meet
Definitely.
at other time and to discuss those things too.
Great. So the message to President Trump, if he wants to add another war to his list of wars he has ended, 8+, so there's going to be 9+ wars. He needs to arm Ukraine to the teeth, and then the war is going to end, and he's going to get his hopefully peace Nobel Prize this time for real. Thank you guys very much for your insight, for your thoughts, and your support for Ukraine. Really, everything you're doing is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leah.